Hello everyone, welcome to Manifest IAS. You are watching Current Jots. This is Manjunath, Polity Faculty at Manifest. Current Jots is a current affairs initiative that we started on April 1st, and as part of this initiative we'll be covering all important current events that have transpired since June last year. Also, we'll be doing a second leg of Current Jots wherein we'll be covering issues prior to June and also issues after March this year. And the PDFs of these videos are also available for download, the links of which are posted in the comment and the description section. For time stamping of these videos, please see the description. And as part of this lecture series, in my last video, I had completed internal security. Now we are starting an important chunk called the international relations, India and the world generally. So under international relations, I have made a video with respect to the strategy and also analysis of previous year papers. I have clubbed internal securities, society and IR, and I have made a single video on that. Please, it's advisable that you watch those videos. Watch that particular video in order to understand as to how or what kind of questions are asked in prelims with respect to IR. So this is a very this is a subject or a discipline wherein there is a lot of written with minimum of effort, at least in prelims, because around 4 to 5 questions come, and it requires the least effort with respect to or comparing other subjects. So it is advisable that you do this subject thoroughly, and I had suggested in the video that follow Current Jots videos and IR or international relations properly. I think this would suffice for your prelims questions. So in this particular video, I'll be discussing the topic Indian foreign policy. It is not the static Indian foreign policy. All those Indian foreign policy related current events will be discussed in this. And when I say Indian foreign policy, generally people have a very narrow understanding or a very minimal understanding of Indian foreign policy. When I say minimal, what is it? So generally they'll be understanding it from the point of view of the government, etc. They won't be looking at the various dimensions of Indian foreign policy. Even environmental diplomacy is part of Indian foreign policy. Ocean diplomacy is part of it. Nuclear diplomacy is part of it. Structural aspects of foreign policy making is also part of Indian foreign policy. All those issues I'll be discussing in this particular video. Now, in the first aspects, what I'll be discussing is the structural aspects, that is Ministry of External Affairs and also the reforms recently which have been made with respect to this particular ministry. Later on, I'll be discussing India and nuclear issues. After that, I'll be discussing Indian ocean diplomacy. So the first aspect is Ministry of External Affairs. Under this, what is the development which has been recently made?
Subscribe now and press the bell icon. Never miss an update.
The development is there is a new department which has been, a new division has been established under Ministry of External Affairs. So what is the name of that division? It is called New and Emerging Strategic Technologies. This will act as the nodal division under the ministry for issues pertaining to new and emerging technologies. When I say new and emerging technologies, what do we understand by that? New and emerging technologies refers to technologies which are under research and developmental stages, which may or which there is a high possibility of getting those technologies getting into commercial stage, and these are disruptive technologies which alter the entire functioning of the societies. For example, artificial intelligence, 5G, etc. So what is the when you say when you use the word division, what do we understand by it? Every ministry has certain subcomponents under, substructures under it. After ministry, the next level is department. After department, there is divisions. And when you look at Ministry of External Affairs divisions are classified into two kinds: one on the basis of the function they perform, and one on the basis of the territory they are looking into. So they are so if there is a separate division for Africa, so there is a separate division for Latin America. So these are called regional divisions. Certain divisions are categorized or separated or organized on the basis of the function they are performing. So there is if a specific function, when you look at this, is a functional division. So it is performing a specific function. The function is with respect to the technological functions. So this is a new functional division which has been added. So two kinds of divisions: regional divisions and functional divisions. Now, what is the objective of this particular division? The objective is it will look into all the legal implications of the new technologies emerging. It will also be coordinating in diplomatic issues with respect to those technologies. So, and it will also give a technological background for this particular technological support for the ministries. It will collaborate with foreign partners in the field of 5G and artificial intelligence is its other objective. So with this we have understood the structural change in Ministry of External Affairs. Then we look into what are the new developments with respect to the ministry. One is you have Pravasi Bharatiya Divas, which is conventionally held as a mark of respect to Gandhi's return from South Africa to India on January 9th. So there was a small change with the 15th Pravasi Bharatiya Divas. It was not held on January 9th. The date was shifted to January 21 to 23 so that it falls on the date of Kumbh Mela as well. So both these events were conducted together this time, so the date was shifted. This is one point which you have to remember with respect to 15th Pravasi Bharatiya Divas. Now, what is the theme of this? The theme was role of Indian diaspora in building a new India. That was the theme of 15th PBD. Now, some historical aspect you should be knowing with respect to PBD. Who did PBD begin under? It began under Atal Bihari Vajpayee, because one of the important areas where Vajpayee focused in terms of foreign policy is this one, that is diaspora, focus on diaspora. So it becomes institutionalized from then on, and every year this event is held. And I've told you what is the historical link for this: Gandhi's return to India from South Africa. And more importantly, you also have to remember that under Vajpayee, when you see the trends, this is one trend you see: diaspora focus. Second focus is on strategic relations. That is, it is in his period that first time you sign a strategic partnership with France in 1998. Also, free trade agreements as a liberalization trend or LPG trend in foreign policy also starts with him, because it is under him India signs the first PTA with Sri Lanka in 1998. So these are the points you can remember for any kinds of such unconventional questions in prelims. Next is Raisina and Dialogue. This is also an initiative of Ministry of External Affairs. One of the allegations against Indian foreign policy is that, or criticisms against it is that, foreign policy in India is not backed up by research. There are no research organizations to support India's foreign policy, because research, what we call as a think tank culture. So in recent times, think tanks have emerged. So one such think tank is Observer Research Foundation. Others you see, others like the Council of World Affairs, Organization for OCWR, World Relations. That is one think tank. This is also other think tank which are prominent in the working of foreign relations. Now, ORF has, along with the Ministry of External Affairs, has initiated a dialogue, or it is a format called Raisina Dialogue. It is a multilateral conference held annually since 2016 in Delhi, and there a particular theme is picked up. Till date, 4 Raisina Dialogues have been held, and seminars and research are conducted. Leaders from different, particularly the neighboring countries, are invited to these conferences. Next is, so this what we did with the earlier topics is with respect to the structural aspects and also the organizational aspects of the ministry. Next, we are coming to certain historical aspects of Indian foreign policy and their current related news. One of the dimensions or one of the important facets of Indian foreign policy was NAM, and NAM recent developments you should be knowing. Also, it becomes important because the present dispensation of the present government has been showing an aversion towards NAM, because it reflects in the PM not attending NAM summits. So 17th and 18th summits the Prime Minister of India skipped. In the recent after the COVID outbreak, there was a virtual meeting of NAM contact group held wherein PM addressed. So 17th and 18th summits, the 17th and 18th, 17th summit was actually asked in optionals. In political sense, 17th summit in itself was asked as a 10-mark question. So in prelims also it becomes important where it was held, etc. So 17th NAM summit was held in Venezuela, Margarita Island, and with the theme peace, sovereignty and solidarity. So 6 years after, so okay, one more thing is, we look at 18th one, then I'll come to the historical aspect of it. 18th non-aligned summit was held in Baku in Azerbaijan. The theme was upholding the Bandung principles. The Bandung principles are, the Bandung conference was held in 1955, what is popularly known as Asian Relations Conference. So Asian Relations Conference, it was an initiative of Nehru, under which 10 principles were adopted. These 10 principles form the basis for NAM. It is after 6 years after Bandung Conference, a summit is held called the Belgrade Summit, which is officially known as Asia-African Solidarity. So it is out of 1961 Belgrade Summit that NAM comes into existence. So see, these are the developments. Historical aspects you should remember: 17th Summit, 18th Summit, and the recent contact group meeting, which was virtually held, wherein Prime Minister addressed. Next is no first use policy. So next we are entering the aspect of nuclear issues with respect to India. So when I say nuclear issues, what are the aspects of it? One is India's nuclear foreign policy, also India's stand on various nuclear conventions. So India has joined certain nuclear regimes. Those regimes, along with India's policy, you should be knowing. So India gave a statement recently that India is no longer going to strictly adhere rather to no first use policy. It says that it can change it according to its conveniences. Coming to the next issue of Indian foreign policy is India's nuclear policy. And for the detailed topics of this particular, I forgot to give the topic list at the beginning, as we usually do in every video. Just for the topic list, please see the description wherein the topic along with the time stamping has been given. With respect to the next issue which I am discussing, it is the nuclear aspects. When I say nuclear aspects, it includes India's broader policy with respect to nuclear issues, and also India's stand on specific nuclear regimes and nuclear agreements. India has recently joined certain nuclear regimes. Those regimes you should be knowing. So first thing is, with respect to nuclear policy, India has sent a message to Pakistan recently that India will not be going to adhere to nuclear policy. This was not an official statement made by the government. It was a statement made by the Minister of Defense, and it was not officially supported or buttressed by the government. So Rajnath Singh had said that India will not strictly adhere to the principle of no first use. So then in this context, the policy becomes important. What is nuclear policy and what are its provisions? I had mentioned about nuclear policy in my earlier lectures, I think, when I was discussing internal security, where I had discussed nuclear command authority. There I had brought the issue of nuclear policy. And nuclear policy was, I think, in National Security Advisor and Council, etc. So Indian nuclear doctrine, the nuclear policy, nuclear doctrine was adopted in 2003, proposed in 1998 by National Security Advisory Board, which was established as a three-tier structure. The advisory board gives this policy. It was later adopted by Cabinet Committee on Security in 2003. Now, under the nuclear policy, what are nuclear doctrine? What are the provisions? First thing it says is India will not be the first. India will follow the principle of no first use. That is, India will not use nuclear weapons as suo motu. First, it will not be the first one to use. It can use only as a retaliatory mechanism. So when other country attacks India with the nuclear weapons, only then it will use against it. So this is in order to establish this or in order to implement this particular idea, you need a second strike capability if it has to be effective. So second strike capability refers to what? It refers to the ability to survive the first attack made by the enemy. So your Arihant was INS Arihant was moved towards this direction, wherein second strike capability was being made stronger. So stealth technology plays a key role in no first use. Second is voluntary moratorium and test. Remember, it is voluntary, not compulsory. It is not an obligation imposed on by some other country. It is India's imposition on itself. The third is India will follow the principle of credible minimum deterrence, meaning that India will have only a minimum of nuclear weapons which is credible. Credible means what? It will bring deterrent effect. So India is having weapons only to bring deterrent effect as a defensive mechanism, not an offensive mechanism. So these are the major three provisions of India's nuclear policy. Recently, India has joined certain nuclear regimes. So India has become part of Wassenaar arrangement. Energy, it is still, it is aiming to become the member. Australia group, it has become. NTCR also, it has become. So these four nuclear regimes you should be knowing. A regime is different from protocol or a convention or a treaty. Treaty is of a higher order. There are penalties, etc. A regime is slightly less stricter. So these are the four regimes. These are export control regimes. They control or impose regulations on certain kinds of nuclear exports, maybe technology, maybe nuclear material, missiles, etc. So Wassenaar arrangement is an export control regime for conventional arms, and it is also for dual use goods. A dual use good means what? A good which has which can be used for both civilian and military purpose. That is one thing. India has become a member. Nuclear suppliers group is for nuclear fuel, and nuclear supplier group was actually a consequence of India's test in 1973. It was established in 1975. India conducted the test in 73-74. There, as a response to it, NSG was established, and ironically today India wants the membership of NSG. Third is Australia group. Australia group is meant to control chemical and biological technology, and fourth is MTCR. MTCR is basically for missiles and also unmanned aerial vehicles. So rockets and unmanned aerial vehicles capable of delivering a payload of at least, so not missiles, rockets, delivering a payload of at least 500 kg with a range of 300 kilometers. So these rocket launches and also unmanned aerial vehicles, these will be controlled under this particular regime. Next is, there is one more development with respect to the treaties on nuclear weapons. We have seen NPT, CTBT, those are conventional or also static issues. There is a new development that is called Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. This was signed or initiated in 2017, and it was signed by many countries, but ratification is yet to happen. So this is an initiative of an NGO. The NGO's name is International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. It's a coalition of NGOs in 100 countries promoting the idea of nuclear prohibition or nuclear weapon prohibition. Now, how is this treaty different from other treaties like NPT, CTBT, etc.? Give nuclear power status to a few countries, excluding others. So it is kind of discriminatory. But this treaty talks about complete prohibition. No one will be possessing nuclear weapons, and once adopted, it will be permanent in nature. It will be legally binding on those nations who have adopted. So this is a big development. It remains to be seen as to how countries respond to it, whether they ratify it or not. Next is, I told you, Indian foreign policy is not just the conventional aspects like Indian NAM, etc. and all. Nuclear issues is one, and India's response to various treaties also become part of India's foreign policy. So there was one treaty which was in news called Convention Against Torture. There was one more convention called Convention on the Status Relating to Refugees. This concept, status relating to refugees, I'll be doing in South Asia under Rohingya issue. Here I've picked up torture issue. India has refused to ratify this convention. Though India has signed it, India has refused to ratify. So what is this convention we look into? It was signed in 1984, entered into force into 1987. It gives a very broad definition of torture, physical, mental, etc., which also includes your custodial torture, etc. So a country which is party to this convention will have to have a legal regime within the country. There should be a legal framework. They should have their own national laws protecting citizens against torture by the citizens, by the state. So it is a kind of a convention which protects human rights of people, and it also imposes one more responsibility on a country which is party to it. It says that any country which is party to it should follow the principle of non-refoulement. What is non-refoulement? You should not send a person to a country or extradite a person to a country or send a person to a country where there is no anti-custodial torture or anti-torture, where there are no anti-torture laws. This is called non-refoulement principle. Non-refoulement principles is also there in your Convention on the Status Relating to Refugees. What is that we'll discuss. Next is, now the question comes, why India has signed it but not ratified it. India believes that if signing this convention will compromise with or ratifying this convention will compromise with the sovereignty of India, and it will also impinge on the powers of the state or the powers of nation state. The government will be pressurized, and it says that in many cases the international bodies have not remained non-partisan, they have remained parochial. So what is the reasoning given, or what are the substantiation given? There is a committee under this convention called Committee Against Torture. It's a body of human rights experts that monitors implementation of the convention by state parties. The committee is one of the 8 UN-linked human rights treaty bodies. All state parties are obliged under the convention to submit regular reports to this committee. So India thinks this particular committee impinges on the sovereignty of India, and hence it has refused to ratify. And it also says that India has its own legal regime against torture under IPC, and recently Law Commission has said that India should ratify this, and also India should have a separate law against torture, because there is no separate law on torture, particularly custodial torture in India. Next is the important topic or important aspect of Indian foreign policy is ocean diplomacy. Ocean diplomacy has been a lot in news, starting with OBR, China's initiative of OBR and South China Sea conflict. All those have forced India, or rather nudged India into responding in many different ways. So when India is responding into many different ways, those manifestations you should be knowing as to how India is responding, and each response could be a potential prelims question. And also Indian ocean diplomacy is a big topic in your mains. A separate question can be asked in ocean diplomacy. Already it has been asked in Paul Science, if I'm not wrong. I don't think so it has been asked in GS. It is highly likely that it can be asked in internal security, ocean security. It can also be asked as ocean diplomacy in IR. So what are the developments? We will start with the history wherein it all started, particularly with East Asia and also Indian Ocean region. Now when I'm doing this particular topic, link all these issues with East Asia also, because most of the developments India has initiated is all in the East Asian region as a response to China. So first is South China Sea conflict. Now South China Sea refers to the area adjoining China and other countries in the region, Philippines, Vietnam, etc. So these countries, every country is claiming South China Sea, and particularly they are fighting Chinese hegemonic assertions in the region. China recognizes a line called nine dash line, and entire the territory or entire waters which is enclosed by 9-dash line is claimed by China. So other countries are laying a claim: Philippines, Vietnam, Taiwan, Malaysia. So this in total constitutes the South China Sea conflict. Now we'll just have a look at what exactly it is referred to. So with respect to 9-dash line, I did make a mention. So this is the 9-dash line where China is laying a claim. Along with this, there are certain islands also where they are in conflict: Paracel Islands, Spratly Islands, etc. So also remember one thing: conflicting regions, territorial conflicts are being asked. I have included them wherever possible, and I made an analysis of this under my strategy video, where I said that territorial conflicts, water conflicts, etc., those regions have been asked as geography related questions, map related questions, along with IR, mixing it with IR. That was one trend which I analyzed. So this is keeping that in mind, I have picked up this issue. Now what are the developments with respect to South China Sea? Philippines challenged the claims of China under UNCLOS. So UNCLOS has 4 mechanisms to solve it. So So what are the four mechanisms that we'll look into, then we'll come to how it was, what was the recent decision given. The four mechanisms are: either you can go for the tribunal, International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. This was established under the convention, UNCLOS, that is the UN Convention on the Law of Sea. Or you can go to ICJ Hague, or you can establish an ad hoc arbitration in accordance with Annex 7. In case nothing follows, that is, nothing follows in the sense one of the parties does not give any specific preference, that out of the three does not give any specific preference, in that case a special arbitral tribunal is constituted. So when Philippines challenged, China did not show any interest. Naturally, this by default, this procedure was followed. A special arbitral tribunal was followed. Now, under this, what was the mechanism? UNCLOS has a agreement with PCA. They have agreed to work together, Permanent Court of Arbitration. So UNCLOS is different, PCA is different. What are these? We'll discuss. So PCA then establishes a tribunal under this, and that gives a decision. So PCA gives a ruling that China cannot lay any historical claims over that region. China should not hegemonically assert it. It should maintain. It should follow international rules and agreements, is what it said. But despite China being a party to PCA, Permanent Court of Arbitration, it did not give. It did not heed the judgment. So these are the developments which have happened. So in that context, you should be knowing the geographical aspects of the region, how geographical aspects. Along with that, you should also be knowing the institutional aspect. Now, what is UNCLOS? What is PCA? That you should be knowing. PCA gave the ruling. What is PCA? PCA refers to Permanent Court of Arbitration. Though the word court is used, it is not a court in true sense. It focuses on arbitration. Just like Lok Adalats in India, they solve disputes amicably. There is no pleading, there is no hearing, there is no lawyer. It is mediation kind of a system. So it is an intergovernmental organization located at Hague, the Netherlands, where your ICJ is housed. PCA is also housed there only. It has a certain specific history to it. It is the oldest institution for international dispute, established in 1899. It is an outcome of a conference called Hague Peace Conference, and there was, out of this conference came a convention called Hague Convention for Pacific Settlement of International Disputes. So after this first conference, there was a second conference also held. So Hague Peace Conference, this was initiated by Tsar Nicholas II of Russia. So out of these two conferences and the two conventions, the first convention 1899 and the second one, that is named as Convention for Pacific Settlement of International Dispute, PCA is established. Now it's not a court in traditional sense, which I've discussed. It deals with various issues, legal issues involving territorial, maritime boundaries, human rights, etc. And also you have to remember that PCA is very closely related to the selection of judges of ICJ. ICJ judges will be discussing when I discuss UN it's a separate video, under which judges election was recently recently conducted, wherein India's judge was appointed vis-a-vis UK. So there you need to know the process. So PCA is the one which sends the nominated members of different countries to ICJ. It is not through nations which judges are elected. It is they are rooted through PCA in order to keep it neutral and apolitical. So PCA sometimes gets confused with ICJ. The PCA is, however, not part of UN system, that you have to remember, although it has observer status in UN General Assembly. With this, we have understood PCA. Next is UNCLOS. I told you maritime disputes is related to UNCLOS. UNCLOS refers to, if you look at the full form, United Nations Convention for the Law of Sea. So it is very easy to have a territorial border, but when it comes to international waters, oceans, demarcation became difficult. As a result, there was a convention signed in 1982, and after that it came into being or into force in 1994. This lays down a comprehensive regime of law and order for world's oceans, and where is your territorial sea, what is a country's exclusive economic zone, 12 nautical miles, 200 nautical miles, etc. Those are the demarcations it makes. It also gives transport or also transit rights to landlocked countries. Suppose Nepal and Bhutan have no adjoining sea or ocean. So what rights they will be having, all this is determined by this. Now out of this convention, 3 sub-conventions or 3 agreements came out. The first is international out of which one institution, first convention, out of which the first tribunal came up called International Tribunal for the Law of Sea, which we have already discussed. It is located in Hamburg, and any kinds of conflict will be taken up by this. Next is International Seabed Authority. This is second. There is a convention for this separate. Under the broader convention, there is one more convention. And under that convention, this commission is established. So Seabed Authority refers to the convention law of the sea mainly relates to your territorial waters and continental shelf. Continental shelf also has a separate convention that we look into. The deep sea mining issues, seabed issues are all looked into by this authority. It is located at Kingston. Now, in recent times, this year only, there was an issue related to deep sea mining. India has started deep sea mining project. There is an ocean drilling project which India has started, and this is related to International Seabed Authority. How does India get the right to deep sea mining? India is recognized as one of the 7 pioneer investors under International Seabed Authority. This Seabed Authority has recognized 7 countries, and in 1987 India also got the pioneer status, pioneer investor. What is a pioneer investor? Who have already made investment in those regions. They will get the authority to mine, and mining of what? Polymetallic nodules is the mining, and that as a result India has started a separate program or an initiative under this. That was in news recently. This is more related to geography. Under geography you'll be studying resources. It is related to that. Next is third convention or sub-convention under this is Commission on the Limits of Continental Shelf. The convention is Convention on the Limits of Continental Shelf, out of which a commission came up. It is located in Geneva, Switzerland. It is mainly related to demarcation of continental shelf. Now, in this convention, overall convention, UNCLOS has 160 member parties, which includes India and China as well. So China was bound to accept the ruling of PCA under UNCLOS because it's a party to it. But and also you have to remember that US still has not ratified this convention. US is out of many conventions despite being called the upholder of rule of law all over the world. It's no law. It is not a member of many important bodies like UN Human Rights Council, UNCLOS, etc. Next is Quad. Quad is also a response to Chinese assertions. So this is the first initiative, not first in terms of chronological order, the first in terms of what I'm dealing in this video. So Quadrilateral Security Dialogue is currently, it's the formal name. It is the strategic dialogue, meant for maritime security. It is occupied, or it is composed of United States, Japan, Australia, and India. So basically it was a response to Chinese assertion in the East Asian region. So certain countries like US and India were entered and they came together. And remember, this is a kind of formalization of an institutional mechanism which we already started long back. In 1992 we started our first Malabar exercises between India and United States. Japan joined in 2015. Australia keeps coming in and out depending on the circumstances. So Malabar exercises gets a kind of institutional mechanism through Quad, is what you can analyze. Next is one more response of India is Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. Now, this Indian Ocean Naval Symposium was launched in 2008. It includes all Indian Ocean littoral states. Now it at present has 35 members, and under it there are 3 working groups which have been established in 2014. One is for humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. Next is security in information security and interoperability, and third is anti-piracy, maritime security issues. This was in news due to the Somalian piracy. This was required because of the Somalian piracy issues. And after in 2017, for the first time, it also starts Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. It started its International Maritime Search and Rescue exercise. It was held in 2017 for the first time under the chairmanship of Bangladesh. Now what you have to remember is naval chiefs of all the countries meet under this particular institution or particular format, Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. Next is India also has one more institution in the region called Indian Ocean Rim Association. And remember, this question was asked in prelims recently, wherein they had asked what is the mandate of IORA. In prelims, like one of the options was it purely deals with economic relations. Now Indian Ocean Rim Association deals with many issues, maritime security, economic relations, etc. It was formed as Indian Ocean Rim, formerly known as Indian Ocean Rim Initiative, was signed. It was formed in 1997. It consists of 22 countries bordering Indian Ocean. Now, it's a regional forum, tripartite in nature, bringing together governmental members, business and academia for closer cooperation and closer interaction. And the coordinating secretariat of IORA is located in Mauritius. Now, what is the principle of working of IORA? It is Sagar's security and growth of all in the region. This was an initiative under this was a coinage made by Prime Minister in 2015. So Sagar principles are the principles of IORA as well today. Now, what is Sagar, Project Mawsum, etc., that we'll discuss. Sagar is again considered as an answer to OBOR. So its full form is security and growth for all in the region. It is a term coined by PM in 2015 in Mauritius with a focus on blue economy. It's an initiative which gives priority to Indian Ocean, and also it says that ocean diplomacy should be governed by a climate of trust, transparency, and international maritime rules should be followed. This was in a way a pot shot or a jibe at Chinese unilateral assertions in the region. It is in line with the principle of Indian Ocean Rim Association, which we have discussed. Next is Project Mawsum. Sagar was asked in mains as to how effective it is a counter to OBOR. That is more of a debate with respect to mains. What is required for prelims have already discussed. So something similar to Sagar is Project Mawsum. Project Mawsum is basically a cultural revival project of in what countries. It is a cultural economic project by Indian Ministry of Culture along with Archaeological Survey of India and Indira Gandhi National Center for Art. These are the three institutions involved. It aims to rebuild maritime and economic connections with 39 countries bordering Indian Ocean. So which are those 39 countries? These 39 countries have experienced monsoonal pattern of climate, and these countries, since they have a monsoonal pattern, based on this monsoonal pattern, their culture is written, because monsoon has an impact on everything. It has an impact on the economy of the region. It has an impact on the culture of the region, and naturally there is a kind of civilizational link which exists in these 39 countries. Among these 39 countries that have been given as a intangible heritage over years. So India is trying to connect or revive these cultural and economic linkages of 39 countries. So it aims to, what are the major objectives of this project? There are 4 objectives. It aims to revive lost connections with the countries. So once it revives, it will establish linkages. It will provide a platform to link the sites of cultural and natural world heritage sites of the region. So if there is a heritage site in India and there is a heritage site in another monsoonal country, those will be linked. So the gaps will be filled. That is the third objective. The project wishes to redefine cultural landscapes by identifying gaps in World Heritage sites and filling them through creating relationship between existing sites of cultural and natural heritage. So existing cultural heritage sites under UNESCO will be linked, and finally, once linkages are established, a World Heritage nomination for these cross-national sites will be achieved. So World Heritage tag will be got for these linked sites. It will be a cross-national site, of course, because once you have linked. So these are the 4 nominations, 4 objectives of this particular program. Next is Project Spice Route. Project Spice Route is also similar to Mawsum, but it is different in terms of its objective slightly, and also it is different in terms of who is going to implement this project. Project Spice Route exists to revive the trade route between the ancient Kerala and 30 countries. So it is an initiative by the Kerala government. It has been acknowledged recently by the UNESCO, and here it is not the cultural aspects which are being emphasized on, it is the economic aspects which are being linked. So the primary focus is economic aspects, there the primary focus is cultural aspects. Next is, let us discuss certain issues in Indian Ocean which are disputed issues, and have also affected India's foreign policy. So one such issue is Chagos Archipelago. Chagos Archipelago is located in Indian Ocean, and India has been nervous, and India has also expressed its reservation with respect to intervention by foreign powers in Indian Ocean region, which started with UK initially as a colonial power. Then it handed over Diego Garcia, a part of Chagos Archipelago. A part of Chagos Archipelago has been handed to US. Later on, it was France. France established a base here, military base in La Réunion Island. Then it is China now in the Djibouti, Hambantota port in Sri Lanka, etc. So these are the developments which which India has expressed reservation against. Chagos Archipelago was in news because recently ICJ has given a decision with respect to that. Chagos Archipelago actually belongs to Mauritius. So now Mauritius was a colony to UK, a colony of UK, and it was given independence in 1968. So when it was given independence in 1968, Chagos Archipelago belonging to Mauritius was not given to Mauritius. It remained with UK, and when it was given independence, Mauritius says that we did not demand that particular region because UK had put a condition that they would be giving it on independence only in case they give the Chagos Archipelago to them. So that was a condition made, and hence they did not demand Chagos Archipelago. After this, what happened? So before the independence in 65, this decision was taken that they are going to set up a military base. What was done in 1965? In 1965, out of this specific area called Diego Garcia was separated or was given to, leased out to US to set up a military base. This was in the context of the Vietnam War. So when Vietnam War was occurring, US needed a military base, so UK handed a property of somebody else to US. This is the mechanics of colonialism, which is very difficult to diagnose in today's democratic setup. So not just diagnose, difficult to digest into today's democratic setup. So next is, so what it does, so 65 it gives, 68 it gets the independence, it does not give the archipelago to them. Now what has happened, when it has signed the agreement, what it had done is it had depopulated this entire region, and many local or indigenous people were displaced from that. So it affected the indigenous rights there, but colonial power, and this is a testimony to what colonial powers had created in that particular region. Recently, what has happened is Mauritius has challenged UK's sovereignty over the region, and it has gone to ICJ. So ICJ has given a ruling that it should be given back to. So recently, both UN General Assembly and ICJ have said that UK should withdraw its colonial administration and Chagos Archipelago should be given back to them. Now, in this issue actually came up because UK has extended the lease agreement. In 2016, the lease agreement was extended, and that was challenged by Mauritius. So these are the points you should be remembering. Also from geography point, do find the place where exactly it is. I think I had included geographical aspects. So what are the geographical aspects you should be knowing? It has the largest atoll, as this particular region, the island Diego Garcia has the largest atoll structure of the world. There is one more atoll structure, that is Saya de Mala Bank, is considered larger, but its status is still uncertain. So as of today, this particular Diego Garcia Island has the largest atoll structure. That point you have to remember, and where exactly it is. So it is at this region, Chagos Archipelago, and also with respect to other regions like Assumption Island, Agalega Island, which I'll be discussing later. I'll give you an overall picture of where they are located. With respect to mapping, be very precise of where they are located and the surrounding regions, so that it is easier to answer any kind of question. Next is Agalega Island. India has lost certain regions in the certain islands in the region. One is Agalega Island and Assumption Island. India had signed agreements with countries Mauritius and also Seychelles, but recently the agreement has been, the countries have reneged, they have withdrawn from the agreement. What are the reasons for that we look into, and hence Agalega Island in itself as a geographical aspect, geography plus IR question, is a possibility in this sense. So 2015 India signed an agreement with Mauritius for development of Agalega Island. So basically a base, India wanted to have a base. This was a response to China's establishment of a military base in Djibouti in Africa, the Horn of Africa. So India wanted to set up and upgrade infrastructure. Also, it's enhance the capability of Mauritius defense forces. But this was the country withdrew from the treaty for two reasons. One is there was a protest by the indigenous inhabitants, and also there was a protest by the opposition. Many felt that this could lead to a Diego Garcia kind of situation where people could be forced to relocate from their regions. So this was the reservation they had expressed. Now, if you look at, these are the regions: Agalega Islands, Diego Garcia, which we just discussed, both belonging to Mauritius. Assumption Island is what I'll be discussing next, which belongs to Seychelles. So with respect to Mauritius, two things: Diego Garcia and Agalega. Next is Seychelles, Assumption Island. India had an agreement with Seychelles also. When I say agreement, it is a lease agreement for 30 years, usually it is. So India signed an agreement with respect to developing a naval base in the region, Assumption Island. But this was also, this was a response to Djibouti again, the naval base of China. So recently, Seychelles also withdrew from the agreement. So these were considered as setbacks to Indian diplomacy. So because there was a political opposition in the region, so that is why they withdrew. So with this, what you have to understand, what you have to remember with respect to these topics is the geographical aspects are more important. So there is a possibility of asking map related questions. The final response with respect to Indian ocean diplomacy is India Information Fusion Center. Now, Information Fusion Center is a kind of projection of India's soft power, just like Blue Economy initiatives within ASEAN, that is India ASEAN Blue Economy initiatives recently. So Information Fusion Center is to basically promote white shipping. White shipping refers to commercial shipping. There are different kinds of shipping that we'll discuss. So a fusion center was needed. Earlier what happened, whenever you needed information regarding ships or ships moving in other countries, you had bilateral arrangements with them. So India had signed white shipping agreements bilaterally. So India is now doing away with this tedious and labyrinthine mechanism, and we'll be having a nodal center called Information Fusion Center, which will look into all the white shipping issues. So what it will be doing, this fusion center will be sharing information with all other countries in the region who are party to it, who have signed white shipping agreements. Second is India will also hold liaison officers. Liaison officers are the collaborating officers. So different officers from different countries will be allowed to station in this information centers for collaboration. So these are the developments, and thus it does away with the tedious and the hectic mechanism of signing individual agreements and dealing them separately. There will be one common center now. So Information Fusion Center is based where it is located. It is an initiative of the Indian Navy's Information Management and Analysis Center, which is located at Gurugram, and Fusion Center will also be located. It is a single point center of Indian Navy, linking all coastal radar chains to generate a seamless real-time picture of nearly the 7,500 kilometer coastline. Indian Navy has launched it is an initiative of Indian Navy, and also I told you it acts as a platform for exchange of non-sensitive information. Remember that it is commercial shipping. It's not military related issues, not security related issues. Hence, sensitive information will not be shared. Only the commercial information will be shared. So to understand this better, you should also be knowing certain kinds of shipping. There are three kinds of shipping: white shipping, gray shipping, and black shipping. So white shipping refers to the exchange of prior information on movement and identity of commercial non-military vessels. India and US have signed white shipping agreement. Just as an example I'm giving. What does grey shipping refers to? Grey shipping refers to military vessels. Black shipping refers to illegal vessels. So with this, I have done with all the aspects of Indian foreign policy, and in this video I've basically given a kind of foundation for my next videos. In my next videos, I'll be taking up individually each region, and I'll be discussing bilateral relations, bilateral developments of those region, current events, and also bilateral disputes, any kind of trade agreements, regional organizations of that particular region, etc. Now, coming to the final part of this initial part of the video, that is questions. As part of every video, we are giving you questions to solve. So these will be related to the topic which I've done in the video. This is to assess yourself, like as to how much of the video I've understood. It is not an assessment for you only, it is an assessment for us as well as to how the videos are being received. These questions will be pinned in the comment section. Do answer them. It will help you and us as well. And the three questions under this are: one is white shipping, second is related to Assumption Island as part of the trend of IR and geography, third is related to the Convention Against Torture. That's all for this video. Hope you liked it. Thank you. Have a great day.